Hello and welcome to our podcast MMKB. I'm Kaylee and I'm here with
Marlene, Molly,
and Bella.
The title of the book is In Cold Blood. The genre of this book is true crime/nonfiction. It was released on January 17th, 1966, and it has received the Edgar Award for the Best Fact Crime. This novel takes place in 1959 in Holcomb, Kansas. It focuses on a kind-hearted family named the Clutters, whom many in Holcomb envy. The story starts off on November 15th with family members Herb and Bonnie Clutter alongside their two children Nancy and Kenyon Clutter. As we begin to get to know the family better, we come to know that the Clutters were a beloved family and very well known around Holcomb. Mr. Clutter was a wealthy farmer, while Bonnie was a very antisocial and depressive wife. As for their two children, Nancy was a well-behaved, sophisticated young lady whom many adored, and her brother Kenyon was a highly intelligent boy. We then get to meet the killers Richard, Dick, Hickok, and Perry Smith, and come to understand what and how they were able to execute their despicable plan of robbing and brutally murdering the Clutter family. After the murder of the entire Clutter family, the town of Holcomb is terrified and frightened of who could have committed such a heinous crime. As for the murderers, Dick and Perry, we eventually found out of their troubled past and come to understand their psychological issues that might have caused them to commit this crime. Despite their attempts to flee, the killers are eventually found and brought to their trial, ultimately resulting in them being sentenced to death and their eventual execution by hanging and finally captivating justice for the Clutters.
So our first question is, what worldly connections does the book have to today's society? And I think that mental health is something that is really brought up a lot in this book, including Perry's background, which has a lot of factors of mental health, with his mom and his dad being very violent. Perry's background reveals that he has a lot of psychological issues, and Dick, who has a personality disorder, which explains how his thoughts were brought to life, and this relates to other crimes influenced by their criminal and own personal thinking.
Yeah, so I think that the psychological issues connect to the real world because it shows that criminals are not always that easy to understand, like how Kaylee said. Perry and Dick have psychological disorders, and sometimes they do terrible things because of their past experiences or mental health issues. But it also makes me question if punishment always solves problems or if there's better ways to deal with crime. And I think the book really made me realize that people can be good and bad, but it's really important to try to understand why people do the things they do. Whether it's really, really bad, like how these killers killed the Clutters, but it was also due to psychological issues deep down. They have severe traumatic experiences that have really affected the way that they may act around people, or in this case, may have killed the Clutters.
In the book, it really shows how much past experiences can affect someone's mental health and well-being. For example, Perry had a very rough childhood, which ended up changing him for the worse and causing him to do bad things. Another example is when he lied to Dick about killing a man just for his own validation and to look tough to Dick. There has been suicide in his family and also mental health disorders that caused his violent tendencies.
In my opinion, I think this book has a worldly connection based on the true crime genre and has an influence on countless other works of literature, film, and television. Its impact on popular culture and true crime genre is significant.
Okay, so how did the book make you guys feel?
I think it made me realize that the book captures a reality of violence and crime in today's society. While the Clutter murders represent an extreme example of violence, the theme of crime and its consequences resonates in multiple aspects. Many people have been touched by crime in some ways, whether as a victim or member of affected communities. I think that the book In Cold Blood invites readers to confront the harsh realities of violence and its far-reaching impacts.
The book gave me lots of mixed emotions. Like at the beginning of the book, I felt very bored, but towards the middle, I felt the suspense building. Throughout the book, I also felt very curious and had many questions regarding the murders.
So in my opinion, this book really made me feel kind of bad for Perry and Dick, but at the same time, I don't think they deserve to be executed in such a way as they did, because back then it was legal in many states to be executed in different ways or to be on death row. But I feel like now, as time has gone on, they see how cruel it is, and even though someone did something really bad, I feel like they shouldn't be executed. Instead, they should just be treated and put in a cell for the rest of their life to really reflect on what they had committed and maybe even get some help. And instead of Perry and Dick getting executed, they should have stayed in psych unit or a cell that had a lot of help to help them with their mental illnesses. And in the book, people said that they should be reunited with God or forgiven by God, but then people wanted them to be killed or executed. So I think the book or the author really shows both sides of how people look at what they did. But I think if you really look in depth on their behaviors and their psychological problems and issues, it should have been dealt with more maturely. And I also think since we live in today's society, we see this as kind of cruel to be executed. But since back then they didn't really know a lot about mental disorders and illnesses, they can't really understand how to clearly deal with people like this. And instead want to kill them to just get rid of the fact that it is something really bad.
Okay, and to conclude question two, I also think the book is like really, really gory, and it might be a good book for people who want to read gory stuff like that. But for our group, we didn't really like it, and it made us feel really uncomfortable knowing how they died. The book is also really explicit and gory, and it might not be for people who are very sensitive to that stuff. I feel it is for those who really like true crime stories.
Okay, so moving on, I want to ask you guys how relevant or relatable you guys think are the themes in this book. Wait, I should say are, right?
Why do you not pop? No.
Yeah, I think that I would describe In Cold Blood as a mix of chilling fascination, eerie suspense, and profound introspection. The book revolves around a murder mystery and delves into the dark corners of human psychology and the consequences of unfortunate actions. I would say the book made me feel uneasy as the story unfolds, grappling with the dark realities of crime and complexities of justice. This book left me with lingering questions about the nature of the evil of the characters who committed the crime.
Going off of what Marlene said about the aspect of evil, it really makes me put into perspective how sinister one can be without any particular reasoning. Like how Dick just wanted to murder the Clutters just because he didn't want any witnesses, but he could have easily just left the house. I also think that one of the themes in the book is justice, and injustice takes place in many crime cases. And for this to be one of the few that were targeted, I think it means a lot. It changed the way of thinking for everybody, and there are also many psychological reasonings behind the way that you think and what you think is right or wrong. And some people don't have that, and it can cause people to make dumb, irrational decisions. The book made me feel really uncomfortable because of all the amount of details that they were put into the book and the way that they were murdered. It also made me feel really heartbroken for the Clutters, knowing that their killers were very unexpected and they didn't even know why they were going to kill them. They just died feeling very terrified. And as well as feeling relieved knowing that the murderers were no longer like going to harm other people. So what do you think, Molly?
Yeah, I also think that due to today's crime, the themes of In Cold Blood are relevant. Like Kaylee said, justice is a main theme showed in the end of the book when the two killers finally get caught. Going back to question two, I think the book made me feel really confused because of how many setting changes there were. For example, Dick and Perry were in Mexico and then went to California to Kansas, but then in a very short time span, they were in Florida and then Las Vegas, which I thought was really confusing because, like, how did they get there in such a short time span without flying? And I feel like a lot of details lacking there because the setting changed so fast and they went so far away.
Adding on to Molly was saying, I completely agree how I feel like the author left out important details on the actual traveling process instead of adding unnecessary details to the book and the characters and their past and all of that. They should have at least included details upon their traveling because it leaves readers to be a bit confused as to how they got there so fast. Or and when they change perspectives from the detective to back to Dick and Perry, it's like they already got there, but we don't know and we don't have specific dates or time frames as to when that happened. So I feel like if this book was better put together, it would make readers understand more. And I also feel that this book is not meant for fast-paced readers because it doesn't get to the point until page 50 or about so, and it gets pretty slow after they explain the murders of the Clutter family. And I feel like they add a lot of unnecessary detail, but at the same time, it helps you envision the plot and their true intentions between Dick and Perry and what happened with the Clutters. I personally think in the, I personally think the themes in the book are sort of relatable to a certain extent because although nowadays there's a lot more murders and a lot more violence in today's society, back then it wasn't really normal for these mass murders or a lot of violence to happen among society, especially in less populated towns like Holcomb. The author expresses this town to be really isolated in the middle of Kansas, many farmers, one cafe, one of everything, and they're really spread far apart. So I think in towns like these nowadays, they're not really heard of, but in more populated cities, for example, like Chicago, there's a lot of violence with shootings, murders, even in other small suburban towns around the US. There's a lot of violence that's become more normalized. So, this is why I think it's not that relatable to today's society, but possibly it may have been back then. And I think it's really hard to get away with murder now, especially with new technology being created and stronger police workforces can really make getting away with murder hard. And also with the executions in many states in the US, they're not executing they're not executing any guilty people of murders. I think it's only legal in a few states. So in today's society, if Perry and Dick were to have killed the Clutter family in 2024, they would have just gone to jail for a long time or possibly even put into a mental institution due to their mental illnesses because that's pretty much what led them to commit these murders. So this is why I don't think the themes are that relatable in the book to today's society.
Alright, guys, thank you for listening to our discussion of In Cold Blood by Truman Capote.
If you guys enjoyed our podcast, subscribe to MMKB to be notified for our next book discussion of the book #MurderTrending, and have an amazing day.
Bye!
And